May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. I think that everybody in this room has noticed that there is a nutritional problem in the world of enormous proportions. And to be sure, this is not just a problem in the West, it's a worldwide phenomenon. Wherever the industrialized foods of the West have touched, malnutrition and disease abound. Heart disease, stroke, cancer, autism, the list goes on, and some of these are quite new to the modern age. And the problem is that there's not enough food to go around. There's plenty of food to go around. In fact, the problem is that there's too much food going around. That is the food of the wrong kind. Fast food, unbalanced food, toxic food, carbohydrates laced with neurotoxins, devoid of the proteins and the fats that the body needs, and other crucial nutrients. And it has resulted in an epidemic of disease and disability and death. In an era of heroic medicine, even our heroes die young, in misery and in pain. And not unrelated to this fact is that the Western world is suffering from the same spiritual malady. The fast foods and the plentiful foods of the current religious establishment feed the people the social gospel or the simple gospel or the cheap grace gospel or the I'm okay and you're okay gospel or the health and prosperity gospel. I know you've all heard these options. The most successful churches are said to be the fattest churches, with large pens for the sheep to sit in, to feed upon a slurry of mediocrity and mendacity and money-grubbing management. They are fattened, but only for the slaughter, and the pastor's purse is enlarged. Such things should not be. The church must feed each other, the Bible says quite clearly, not be fed upon. We are to feed on the flesh and blood of Christ in mystical communion, yes. In our doctrine, yes. In our studies, in our adult forums, in our Sunday schools, in our sermons, in our music, in our fellowship, all of these things are true. As our parable this morning suggests, we are the guests at the marriage supper of the Lamb, and that supper has in many ways already begun. Christ is the bridegroom. His flesh and his blood have been given for fare at this feast. If we feed on anything other than that, we will eventually grow weak and sickly, and we will die. You know, ironically, this was one of the main thrusts of the Reformation. The battle cry of the Reformers was sola scriptura. The scriptures from now on were going to be the sole authority, because, of course, the church, the Reformers rightly claimed, had insinuated a host of humanistic doctrines and other heresies that were making the soul of the church sick. But we may observe now, in retrospect, 500 years later, that a change of authority did not eliminate ignorance and heresy in the church, despite this tremendously successful Reformation and the revival that went along with it, and also a cultural renaissance that went along with it. We now live with a spiritual nutrition problem of enormous proportions. We live physically in a spiritual wasteland in our country today and in the world. And this, despite the fact that we have achieved extraordinary levels of literacy in our country and throughout the world, which has exceeded anything that has ever gone before in the history of humanity. We have more study resources, more dictionaries, more Bible helps, more commentaries, more Bible programs, going through all those books yesterday. It was amazing, the resources that we had. And a host of other audiovisual devices and materials that men now have at their disposal more than ever before since the ascension of Jesus Christ. And yet, glutted with Bibles, the dark ages of ignorance and heresy have descended upon our culture once again. I thought I heard you talk about this in the adult forum, about this new survey that's going around, very recent. It was published in Christianity Today, a very respectable evangelical magazine. And the article says, most American evangelicals hold views condemned as heretical by some of the most important councils of the early church. Now, this is before the corruption set in. 51% of the evangelicals in this survey, the article says, appear to deny or have very fuzzy views about the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, specifically his personhood. For example, they believe that they check the block saying he is merely an impersonal force. Well, it is clearly not biblical. And also 16% of evangelicals, 16%, doesn't seem like much, but this is 16% believe that Jesus is created. This is Arianism. This is a horrible heresy. And also, another 16% of the evangelicals are not sure. Or maybe it's about 11 or 12%. I don't know if I've got the figures right here. That's a healthy percentage of people that are confused about the deity of Jesus Christ, or the uncreated nature of Jesus Christ. So, the article asks, how are theologies that have been condemned by over 1,500 years ago by these very, very authoritative councils of the church, why are they finding resurgence in contemporary evangelicalism? That's what the article asks. And of course, the article suggests that it's a failure, a systemic failure of adult Christian education as one cause. And of course, these things are never very committal about what it is. They're not trying to get at the root cause. Well, that's an important problem. Adult education is an important problem, but I would wager that it's a problem that is much, much more massive and systemic than just simply a failure of adult Christian education. For example, it starts earlier with our children. By and large, evangelical children, our children, are sent to public schools willy-nilly instead of church schools. And the reason for that is that the church schools that exist are pretty much too expensive, or they're mediocre, or there might even be heretical. And by the time that our children make it to college, they have thoroughly absorbed the scientific materialism and the anti-religious atmosphere and positions of their teachers. And it's basically secular existentialism. They are disciples of secular existentialism the moment they walk through the doors as a freshman in most of our colleges. And the college experience continues and affirms that secular existentialism and continues this evisceration of and corruption of their souls. The church universities that exist or used to exist are, again, either too expensive, too mediocre, or too heretical. So the question is, how will the soul of our young people feed upon Christ? How are we going to fix the problem of adult education when our children are not given anything good or substantive to eat spiritually? What do we do about this? How do we start? Well, I've got the answer. The answer is, I don't know. That is, I don't know, because it's going to take another Reformation. Nothing short of another Reformation is going to fix systemic problems like this. I don't know how Reformation and revival and Renaissance can possibly come to this seemingly hopeless situation that we find ourselves in. That's why so many Christians, I think, today are moping around, praying for the Lord to return early, because they are tired of being part of the church militant and fighting for the doctrines of Jesus Christ and fighting to expunge the sin that is in their own soul. They're just tired. They want to give up. But all I know is that these things can come. They can come at any time. I've said it before, and so say I again. No matter what the odds, no matter what kind of giants might be in the land of promise that we seek to go out and conquer, I know that Reformation and revival and Renaissance can begin at any time and any place, as long as we are obedient to the Lord. That's all it takes. And I think this retreat that we're planning is definitely a step in the right direction as we talk about those things. We're going to deliberately meditate upon the similarly hopeless situation that Gideon faced. The situation was so bad for the church of God in Gideon's time concerning his surrounding culture that the Israel of God then had to thresh their own wheat in secret, lest the Midianites discover their attempts to feed themselves, their own food. And that's, of course, where we are today. And all we know is what Gideon knew. And what did he know? He knew that the Lord was with him. He knew that he was part of the special chosen children, people of God. The Lord said that he would be with those children at all times. He said that he would be. But at some point, we're going to have to ask ourselves the question that Gideon asked himself. His angel is sent down directly from the Lord, probably Gabriel, we don't know who. And Gabriel asks back to this angel, "Oh, my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where are all your miracles, which our fathers told us of, saying, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. Such things should not be." I didn't say that, but that's probably what he was thinking. And you know what the Lord said to Gideon? Here's the Lord's answer. And it had nothing to do with changing the political climate of the country that he lived in, or amassing vast reserves of missionary or church-building money, or flooding the culture with bland religious art and music and bland literature. No, it was nothing like that. The Lord simply looked upon Gideon and said, "Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hands of the Midianites. Have I not sent thee?" And that's all he said. Now let's just assume that the Christianity Today article is right, and I'm sure it is right. Let's assume that the reason that we now live in a post-Christian culture and that our once proud biblical Reformation culture has come to the place of such widespread heresy is because of a systemic failure in adult education. Well, is that it? Really? Is that it? Are there no other problems? And when we find out what those problems are, what can one man do about that? I'm sure Gideon asked himself that question. What can one church do about it? What can St. Timothy's do about it? One thing is for sure. The Lord did not begin by diagnosing any catastrophic or social or religious problems for Gideon, and he didn't give him this global social critique and a global strategy for transforming the religious environment. He said only that one thing: go in this thy might. Go just as you are, as strong as you now are. Now, most of my sermons are exegetical. This is existential. If in any way applies to us, what does that mean? Go in this thy might. I mean, there are so many parallels here. I really don't think that this is that existential. It's borderline exegetical, because this story is going to repeat long after you and I are dead. The church is always going to find itself in this position, the position that Gideon found himself in, and the position that we now find ourselves in. And I'd like to try to answer what that might mean. Go in this thy strength. I think that the first thing that it means is that when we get an invitation to attend the marriage supper of the Lamb, as in our gospel parable this morning, we should sit right down and write him an RSVP, I think. And from now until the moment of that marriage feast, we should make preparations to go. Because, as we said before, it really has already begun. The Lord has sent an invitation to each one of us, as he does to everyone in the world, because he wants us to be there. He wants us to come. He really does want us to be there. He wants us to be part of the church. Well, it's the church militant now, because we're still in the world. We're not the church triumphant just yet. But he wants us to be part of the church militant right now in her spiritual warfare to what? To bring every every intention and every soul into captivity of Christ. Does that sound political to you? No, it didn't. We don't want to legislate morality. We want to get right down to it. Politics is a waste of time for that struggle. He wants us to be part of the church militant, to do that very thing. Because his kingdom is not of this world. We've talked about that before. And it doesn't matter who we are. It doesn't matter how helpless we are, how weak we are, how limited we are. It doesn't matter what gifts we have. Some of us have different skills, Paul says. He goes through a whole list. Some of us are preachers like I am. Some of us are academics. Some of us are teachers. Some of us are good with administration. Some of us keep us out of financial hot water. Some of us just keep the church going. Some with praying. Loey's an excellent prayer warrior. And some with just encouraging. And I could go on and on and on with this list. Everybody thinks, oh, what can I do? Or I'm not really important. You are important. Just your encouragement. You would not believe how much your encouragement, just by your presence and the smile on your face, keep me going. Encourage me to keep going. Jesus Christ makes it extraordinary, clear in his gospel that every single soul that he calls is absolutely necessary in the fight against the Midianites of the modern age. And we're going to talk about how serious he is about this when we unpack this Gideon sequence story during our retreat. But of course, the end of the story, the end of the sermon, is not all will come. All will be invited, but not all will come. It happens at the marriage feast in our parable, and it happens in Gideon's revolution. When the king sends out his invitations to the marriage supper of his son, most of the people simply do not have the time. They have more important things to do. And again, before I share this, this is not an oblique slap in the face of people who can't attend our retreat. My invitation is definitely not the Lord's invitation, not by any stretch. What I'm here speaking of is the Lord's invitation generally to participate in the life. We all have things to do. We have to balance our worldly commitments and our work in the church. Paul acknowledges that there's a huge problem there, and it's a lot easier to be celibate, he says. But we're not celibate. We have families to take care of, and we have careers to take care of, etc., etc., etc. We've all talked about that before. But I'm generally speaking about the Lord's invitation to participate in this much larger battle that we have been called to engage in. And all we need to know to fight this battle, this fight of a lifetime, is that we are sent by the Lord himself. He has called us, and he is sending us. And he will provide everything that we need for this fight. Not only to stand before the enemy, but to stand before him in judgment. And of course, this explains the emphasis in the parable about this one fellow being out of uniform and how important it is to be in the correct uniform. This is a fight that will determine eternal things. This is a fight that's much, much more important than anything really that's on our temporary schedules. And we should all be careful about that. But in this fight, let me just conclude with this. In this fight, the Lord does not need numbers. If the Gideon story is about anything, it's about that. Oh, there's just too many here. There's too many. Tell people to go home. There's too many. I don't want anybody to think that it was through your own strength and your numbers that you beat the Midianites. No, he doesn't need our numbers. And he definitely doesn't need our cash. If he needed our cash, he'd tell us. I need a couple of million. I need you to get a campaign going. If we just had a couple of more million, we could turn this culture around. The Lord doesn't need a single dollar that we give him. He doesn't need our cash. All he needs is us to go in this thy might. Amen.